and we ought to stop this nonsense. Shame on Hegseth. Shame on all of the white male sexist, terrible people who are trying to hurt women, and who are using social media to get to young men. Welcome to another episode of Just the Facts with me, Jill Wine-Banks, the Watergate Girl. And I have a very special guest today who's kind of hard to describe because she has so many different portions to herself. Her name is Alison Gill, aka AG, or Mueller, she wrote. And it's tough to introduce her because, as I said, she's done so many things. She was a naval vet. She was a VA employee, a comedian, a podcaster who really was helpful in unraveling the Mueller investigation. She did that every day and really helped out with details. She also was the victim of a rape and very poor handling by the military. And if we have time, we might talk about what is being done now and how the military is handling rape. I don't know if you know this, Allison, but I was on a panel appointed by the Secretary of Defense in the Obama administration to look at sexual assault in the military and to review their new procedures. She has a prolific Substack, and in reading a couple of her recent postings, I decided I really wanted to have her on the show to talk to me. So welcome, Allison.
Jill, it's so good to see you. We've done so much work together in the past, and I always enjoy talking to you. And thank you so much for doing this show and doing the work that you continue to do.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I was especially interested in your being a comedian. And at the end, I want to ask you what I could do to be funnier, if there's any hope for me. I always consider myself so serious, and I love when I say something hoping that people will laugh, and they actually do. That's the best feeling. But today, I want to start out at least sort of serious, because originally I was just going to vent. I was going to have no guest. I was just going to scream and shout about Trump 2.0. The speed and the detail and the cruelty is really alarming to me. And then when I saw your stuff, I thought, okay, let's combat the fire hose of bad news and talk about things like what you are doing in bringing a lawsuit and what individuals can do. I'm hoping that we can come up with some ideas, because the most frequent question I get online is, what can I, one individual, do to help other than voting, which is too far off? Although I have to, as soon as we finish, I'm going to vote in my mayoral race in Evanston. But let's start by talking about, you brought a lawsuit. Tell me about what your purpose was and what the status is.
Yeah, sure. It seemed to me and several others that DOGE, the so-called Department of Government Efficiency, keeps kind of trying to be Schrodinger's agency, right? They want to say that they are an agency so that they can fire people in other agencies, but then they're not an agency so that they're up under the executive office of the president, so they don't have to respond to FOIA requests. So on February 11th, I filed a FOIA request to DOGE. They have 30 days to answer, and they failed to do so. And so the First Amendment Coalition and National Security Counselors, Kel McClanahan and I, have filed a lawsuit in the Northern District of California to break those emails free from DOGE and to get a court to decide once and for all whether DOGE is subject to the Freedom of Information Act requests. And if so, then how is Elon Musk able to be in charge of it? Because he was not confirmed with advice and consent of the Senate. So we decided that, we'd file a little lawsuit, and that's it. That's where we are. And it's been assigned to a Biden appointee in the Northern District. She's one of the judges that had to have Kamala Harris cast the tie-breaking vote for her confirmation, which she did quite a bit of there toward the end of the Biden administration. But that's, some people don't really have access to file these kinds of lawsuits. These things can cost between $30,000 and $250,000 to do so. So to help folks along with like things that are more accessible for what they can do. Our podcast, The Daily Beans, has a daily good trouble segment where we can give little homework assignments out. Like, for instance, last Tuesday, we had everybody call the office of the Wisconsin Attorney General and ask him, Josh Call, to take some action on what Elon Musk was doing in the Wisconsin um, Supreme Court election, which is happening today as we speak. And by Friday, he had filed a lawsuit. Now, he wasn't successful, but kind of not the point, right? We don't take action necessarily for specific outcomes, but just for the sake of taking action, to gum up the works, to throw sand in the gears, to sabotage what this regime is trying to do. So those are our kind of little daily nuggets of good trouble, inspired by John Lewis.
So I would say we also do actions to call attention to issues. That's kind of what Cory Booker is doing as we speak this minute. Is he's not supporting or objecting to a particular piece of legislation. He's just trying to say, here's what's wrong right now, and pay attention to what's wrong. And that's a good thing to have that happen. I actually made a FOIA request when I was writing my book, The Watergate Girl. I thought, well, wouldn't it be interesting to see the government did a full investigation of me before they, confirmed me as the general counsel of the Army. But even, when I first got my job at DOJ as just a trial lawyer, I went through a full background check. And I made the request. Let me just say that by the time I got it, my book was already long out. COVID was over. My book came out, and literally a week later, COVID hit. And so my book tour got sort of abbreviated. But I finally got something, and it came in a form that was completely unreadable. It was a disc, and my computer doesn't play discs. So I really still have not seen what's in there. But I also I'm on the board of the Better Government Association, and one of the main functions of BGA is FOIA and helping people to make FOIA requests and making sure that government replies to FOIA requests. So Open Meetings Act is another big thing, and investigative journalism is the third stool, and policy are part of what BGA does. But I was so proud to see that you had taken this action and made the effort. I want to share an idea I had. Tell me what you think, which was I was reading Joyce Vance's Civil Discourse Substack, and she was talking about all the new voter suppression laws that are being put in place. And this idea of voter IDs being required. Okay, I have a passport. Not a problem for me, so I just show my passport and I prove my citizenship. But for many people, in fact, at least half the country does not have a passport, and many people do not have their birth certificate. And it costs money and time to get either a birth certificate or a passport. And so I thought, well, maybe I could try to put together a group that would create a non-for-profit that would fund people to assist people who don't have the time to get birth certificates or passports, both in terms of physical help, because as you know from doing your FOIA request, it's hard to do. And then filing a lawsuit is hard. Obviously, you don't need a lawsuit to get an identity paper. So, but you do need money. And while for many people, $10 to get a birth certificate copy, not a big deal. For many people, it is. And no one should be denied the right to vote. We outlawed poll taxes a long time ago, and this is sort of like a poll tax. So what do you think about that as, something that an individual could do is say, I will volunteer to use my computer to get a person into the system to get a birth certificate?
It's funny you bring that up, and I'm asking my producer right now as we're talking, because I had a person on the Daily Beans a couple of years ago during the Biden administration who had set up a nonprofit for just this very purpose.
Really?
And while we continue to talk, I'm going to find out what that nonprofit is. But yes, I think that this is so important because, like you said, there are so many people, and obviously it's the most marginalized people in our communities that have less access to get
Right.
their identification. And obviously that's by design. So as soon as I get that information,
I
I'll
can't wait, and
get your way.
I will make my donation immediately to that organization, and I will post it on all my social media because I'm hoping that people will really take this seriously as a simple step they can take that would be meaningful to help people register.
Yeah, and like
While
you
we're
said,
waiting, oh, go
we
ahead.
don't even have to do that. We don't even, I mean, we can get that information, but also if just in your neighborhood, in your community, there are people that you know that don't have IDs, give them a ride to the DMV, loan them the $8 to get their, I mean,
Right.
I don't think a driver license will work. Meanwhile, we have a bunch of really good, like heroic law firms and groups that are
Yes.
suing against this executive order because as we all know, the president doesn't have any role in overseeing elections. The executive doesn't, which Judge Pryor, super conservative judge in the 11th Circuit, wrote specifically about when Mark Meadows was trying to remove his case from Fulton County to federal court. He's like, look, first of all, you're a former officer. So you don't get representation by the DOJ. But second of all, it is not your job or the president's job. It is Congress and the states that decide how elections are run, not you. So have a seat. And this is Pryor. This is like a really good friend of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. So, I'm interested to follow those lawsuits and see where they go. And I know you're following them too. But
Absolutely.
there's so many ways to fight back, and those little ways that we can, like the average American can fight back. Like I said, it's a lot of people don't have $250,000 to file a lawsuit. Is something like that, something as simple as that, to reach out to people in your community who you can just personally help.
Perfect. And when you mention law firms, I have to respond because I'm very proud that my former law firm, where I was a partner, Jenner and Block, is one of the three firms that has been specifically targeted that is fighting back. Two of the law firms, one being my former husband's law firm, Paul Weiss, and you can see why he's my former husband for many reasons, but that. Um, his law firm caved. And if we don't all law firms don't get together and fight back, no one will be able to represent the point of view that is in opposition to what the government wants. When the government says, yeah, we're not looking at Signalgate, as they now have said, there's nothing there, forget it. Well, every citizen of America knows that what happened there, first of all, was juvenile. It was totally unbelievably juvenile. The tone of the conversation, why those people needed details of when bombs would be dropped, when planes would take off, I don't get it. I worked in the Pentagon. You're a veteran. You worked at the VA. I've had a high security clearance. I don't need to know the takeoff time of airplanes. I don't want that information because if one of them is leaking it, I don't want to be in the chat that led to some pilot dying. And so, I mean, I think there's just too much going on. The ACLU is another resource where if you have a good enough complaint, they might represent you pro bono, as will Jenner and Block, as will Covington, as will Perkins Coie, which are the three firms that are fighting back to defend the rule of law. Um, the ACLU, of course, is doing a lot on the migrant stuff, on the Venezuelan deportations, where they were rounded up, including people who are clearly not Venezuelan, including a father who is El Salvadorian and who was in protected temporary status, including a gay hairdresser, or I think he's a makeup artist, gay makeup artist who had tattoos. So if you had a tattoo, gosh, you better be careful. You're going to get picked up. Oh my God, I forgot about you and tattoos. Are you worried?
I'm always have been worried since November, but not necessarily because of my tattoos as much as what I have to say. A lot of you might not know, but the lawsuit that I filed for FOIA that we were just talking about is actually my second lawsuit in 2023. After exhausting administrative functions within the Department of Veterans Affairs, I sued in federal court the Trump and the VA for wrongful termination, because toward the end of the Trump administration, I was removed from the Department of Veterans Affairs after my podcast was investigated. My Mueller podcast was investigated, and that there was
And
FOIA
that
involved.
involved Hatch. Didn't that involve also Hatch Act, whether you were able to have political speech while Hatch Act?
They tried to come after me for Hatch Act, but couldn't find anything that I did wrong. I used, as the reason I'm AG is because I used a pseudonym, and I never talked about the agency that I worked for. It wasn't until I waited a year after I was officially removed from the Department of Veterans Affairs to actually tell the story, because, ethics say that you need to wait a year. And you're not supposed to do anything that could possibly make a penny off of what you did for the federal government. So I was trying to follow all the rules, and I did. They couldn't find anything. So they ended up firing me for being medically unfit because I have PTSD. A veteran from the Department of Veterans Affairs. I'm medically unfit because I'm a disabled veteran, which is a wild claim, but litigation pending. We actually go to trial this October in that particular case. If
Oh,
it
I
doesn't,
know you'll be posting that, but I can't wait to follow it. October in what court?
in the Southern District of California, where I live.
Okay, that's going to be exciting. I can't wait. And who's your counsel in that case?
The Behrman firm. And I made sure to text him and say, "Do you have any security clearances that might be revoked because of this
Oh my
lawsuit?"
gosh. Yes,
He
and
does not. But some of these, it's not just about security clearances. That, like you said, they're banning these lawyers at like Perkins Coie, et cetera,
from
from
being in
entering
the federal court.
federal buildings, which
Yes,
include federal courthouses.
right.
So
Talk about a deliberate attempt to put a law firm out of business. You can't, and one client of one of the firms that is standing up to Donald Trump, a client got a note saying, you may not bring your lawyers with you to the next meeting. That is a deliberate interference with the right of counsel and so many other rights. It is, to me, it's horrendous. The transgender service restrictions. Have you been involved in that at all?
yes, I've been following that very closely, reporting on that very closely. It's I'm glad to see that the judges Reyes
Right.
and Settle on either side of on both coasts are stepping forward and saying that this is based on malice. I like what Judge Ana Reyes said when she was like, you haven't attached one single study or any bit of evidence to show that people with gender dysphoria are unable to serve or dishonest or whatever. But in your paper straw ban, you attached 5 studies. And so you'd think if you want to ban people from serving in the military, you should have at least as much data and evidence as you do to ban paper straws. So I thought that was a very wonderful piece in her ruling, temporarily enjoining the administration from just arbitrarily kicking people out, using the same language, she said, as they have to kick previous groups of people out of the military, whether they be women or Black people, et cetera. So I thought that was really well written, and the Ninth Circuit now has refused to hear that. Denied the motion from the Trump administration. He wanted to continue to kick everybody out, to kick all
Right.
the transgender troops out. So yeah, I've been following that very closely. It's a thing that's very near and dear to my heart.
It's very interesting because when we were looking at sexual assault, we had hearings and we met with a lot of soldiers, sailors, airmen, guardsmen, Marines, everything. And it was so interesting that actually none had a problem working with a gay or trans person. They said they do a good job and they should stay. I really didn't find anyone that we interviewed who said, makes me uncomfortable. It'll hurt esprit de corps, which is the big argument. Oh, they can't work together. That's baloney. It just isn't true. It's, of course, the same thing that was said when the service was integrated racially. It's what was said when the service was integrated in terms of women being allowed into basic training and into the military academies. That happened during the Carter administration when I was general counsel of the Army. And I got to oversee tests that were being done about how the merger was going. And I found that they were doing tests to see how a unit performed but they would only use 30% fill of women. And I asked them why. And they said, well, because we're sure that the unit could not succeed if there was more than 30% women in the unit. And then they started doing tests at bigger levels, and the women outperformed the men. There was one in particular, this probably wouldn't affect you from the Navy, but a maintenance tent, a field maintenance tent. And when I say maintenance tent, it's, the size of a gigantic air hangar to take in planes and tanks. And it's basically a metal jungle gym substructure over which a camouflage canvas is pulled. And the men would take the canvas, the tarp, and climb up the structure, pulling it totally exposed to enemy fire, because this is a test for what would happen in combat. And it took a really long time, and it was hard. And the women, by the way, back then, women had to have high school diplomas and men did not in order to enlist. So they were smarter, more educated. The women looked at it and said, there are these grommets at the end, little round metal rings. If we put a rope through it and throw it over to some of the team on the other side and they pull it up, that seems like it would be fast and easy. And sure enough, guess what standard operating procedure is now for getting the canvas over the substructure? It's exactly the women's way. So this business of, trans, gay, women, not good. Women meet the same standards, and we ought to stop this nonsense. Shame on Hegseth. Shame on all of the white male sexist terrible people who are trying to hurt women, and who are using social media to get to young men and convince them that women are the problem, that they're losing jobs to women, that women should stay at home and have babies and cook. I don't know if you've seen the movie Adolescence or the series on Netflix, Adolescence. That's what it deals with. And social media is a real problem. Another real problem was Elon Musk saying to all federal employees, if you don't resign and take this little offer we're giving you, which may or may not be enforceable, you may or may not collect it, you could be fired. And by the way, you also have to tell me 5 things you did this week so that I can make sure that you're really working. And you had a great answer to that. I don't know if you remember it. If you don't, I have it in front of me. But do you remember what you said people should answer?
But nope. Yeah. Remind me. I know I did a piece
Okay.
on Substack from a bunch of federal workers who told me what they wish they could say.
Yeah,
But
no, that was the best. That was great. But you had a serious reply, which said, first of all, make sure you get your supervisor's input on this. Protect yourself. And I thought that was really good advice. And then you said they should say that in accordance with the VA, you answered as if you were still at the VA. In accordance with the VA mission of taking care of veterans, their widows and their orphans, and our agency vision to provide veterans with the benefits they have earned, I scheduled veterans for timely medical appointments comporting with the agency guidelines in VISTA. Secondly, in accordance with section, I won't read the exact section, of the performance plan, which directs me to engage with stakeholders in my unit to advance the VA mission, I attended all required meetings, took notes, and provided input when called upon. 3, in accordance with another part of my job description, which says I am required to work with third-party administrators to ensure claims are processed for VA care provided to active duty service members. I worked with WPS to close 36 outstanding claims related to supplemental care provided to DoD beneficiaries at VA facilities. 4, in accordance with another section of my performance plan, I was on time and present at work during my tour of duty each day last week. 5, in accordance with another section of my job description and the VA mission, I set up 4 clinics for scheduling timely medical appointments in specialty clinics in the VISTA system. And I mean, is this still going on where they have to every week tell what they did?
It is. But what's real fun is one of my good trouble segments was to flood the emails at hr@opm.com where you had to respond to those. And just last week, the mailbox became full and started kicking back emails. So they added a second email for people to respond, and then we started flooding that one too, with B movie scripts and things like that, and spam bombs and whatnot. So yeah, and you can tell when you read that, it's like, boy, she sure worked for the government. I mean, if I had a dollar for every performance-based interview I had to answer, or every performance evaluation I had to fill out based on the mission, the vision, the performance, the job description. The only thing I regret not including is in that list is in accordance with some federal statutes. Um,
Yes.
you know,
Or in accordance with the Constitution, I stood up for the rule of law. That would
yeah,
be
I upheld my oath of office
right.
by, not firing a bunch of people
Right.
uh,
Oh, well, let's talk about firing people.
without
That's
cause.
another, yeah, without cause. Um, and even probationary people, which does not mean you're actually on probation because you did anything. It's because you're new in a position. You might be a very experienced person who got promoted into a new position. And so you're now on probation in the new position and therefore getting fired randomly without consideration of the job and mission of the agency and whether the agency can do what they're supposed to do. And which goes along to me with what Elon Musk is doing and breaking everything. And by the way, there's no admission that he's actually the head. They've named some woman who seems to be nowhere and was out of the country when her being head of Doge was announced. But whether he is or not, he is certainly running things. Um, and things are going awry. There's a lot of errors. I mean, we mentioned, I think, the father who was on temporary legal status, a temporary protected status. There's the gay makeup artist. There's also the young man whose younger brother has autism, and his tattoo was the autism sign with his brother's name, and he's taking care of his brother, or was, until he was put into this horrible mass prison, which we, you, I, and everyone listening is paying for. And now the government is saying, and yeah, well, we made a mistake in letting this one person, a father, go to this jail, but we won't bring him back because he's actually a member of a different gang than the gang we met. So we made a mistake because it wasn't the Tren de Agua, but it's a different gang. And so we don't want him back anyway, even though he was in the process. He had an opportunity, or should have had an opportunity, to show that he is neither Venezuelan nor, and that doesn't get to the point where there's no war, so that this enemy alien act can't be used. But just even ignoring that for now, they won't do anything. And of course, they have the power because all they have to do is say to the people they're paying, "We're not going to pay you for him. We want him back." Or they have to go to the government of El Salvador and say, "We're going to negotiate because we have diplomatic relations with you. So it doesn't matter that you have control of this person. We have the ability to bring them back." So it's outrageous that they're saying that they won't do anything and that there's nothing that can be done about this person who could spend the rest of his life in this prison. Does that offend you? What do you think?
It does, and the problem with the Trump administration claiming it's not feasible to return anybody is belied by the fact that they actually did return several people. Because first of all, CCOT, the prison you're talking about, doesn't accept women, so the women were brought back. There were two people that were not Venezuelan, and they were sent back. But the rest, it's
Right.
just done. It's not feasible. We can't bring them back. So I'm really following those lawsuits, very closely. And then back to your other point about these probationary employees, skirting the law is the
Yes.
umbrella that we're talking about here. But those probationary employees, what was so great about that was when Hampton Dellinger, who has now been fired,
Yes.
um, had reached out to two members of the Merit Systems Protection Board, Raymond Lyman and Kathy Harris. Kathy Harris is a former attorney of mine in my wrongful termination suit. Full disclosure. But they determined that these aren't probationary firings because you have to, assess them individually. You coming in and just block firing
Right.
all of them, actually a reduction in force. And there are laws in place that you have to follow if you want to do a reduction in force. You have to give notice. They have appeal rights, et cetera, et cetera. You violated all of that. This is against the law, several laws. And that's why multiple judges now have ordered the reinstatement of these probationary employees. And now we're at the precipice, Jill, including with these deportations that happened on March 15th, where they were ordered to turn the planes around and refused to do so. We're at the precipice now of a constitutional crisis where we're going to see what happens when the Trump administration blatantly defies a court order. We have a contempt hearing coming up in the Alien Enemies Act, Trender Aragua case. I believe on April 8th is the contempt hearing. And we have another hearing on April 4th and another hearing on April 3rd, all for different things involved here. But I think April 4th is the show cause hearing, right? Which is we can go into the
Yeah.
weeds super deep if you want, but it's the contempt issue about
Right.
defying court order. And Judge Boasberg is already super skeptical of their invocation of the, secrets, state secrets
Yeah.
privilege, because it's like it's not a state secret. Besides, if these public flights that I can track on Flight Tracker and you and Marco Rubio sharing all the information on the internet, but it's still a state secret. However, giving actual bombing locations on Signal is not classified. I want to make those two things line up. And the great thing about those two different cases is that Judge Boasberg has them both now.
Right.
And we'll have to hear them talking out of two sides of one mouth. It's going to be really, really interesting.
The hypocrisy and the obvious conflict between the two positions. But let me just clarify one thing for our listeners, which is there is this issue of contempt for not following a court order, because whether you appeal or don't appeal, you have to follow it. And if I can go back to Watergate, basically, Richard Nixon believed in the rule of law. And when he was told to do something by a court, he did it. It ended his presidency, but he did follow the rule of law. And here we haven't even gotten to the merits of the case. We've only gotten to, let's put a hold on everything because there could be irreversible damage done to people if we don't stop it right now. And so the question of when did the plane take off and why couldn't you have it turn around is a question of timing and getting facts. Those are not state secrets. And you're right. And then you have the signal saying, oh, nothing they said was classified. Yeah, okay. So they were talking about a human intel who saw a person enter a building that got bombed. It makes no sense at all. And it's just one more of the things. I mean, we also have, I thought this was, I read it and I went, oh my God, how could they be doing this? The entire staff at the federal agency that funds libraries and museums has been put on leave. Now, why are they doing that? Why are they interfering with the Smithsonian and saying, oh, we're not going to have anything in the Women's Museum that is about trans women, is basically what they've said. The zoo is under that order. What in the zoo? Do you have any idea? I mean, I scratched my head and thought, well, let's see. Are they going to paint the zebras all one color because this is dealing with integration?
The zoo is woke, Bill. It's woke.
Why is the zoo woke? Honestly, I'm asking because I don't get why the zoo would be in this category of being in an executive order that they have to stop doing whatever they're doing. And I don't get it.
Conservation, preservation of species that would otherwise be destroyed by drill, baby drill. Honestly, I think the bigger umbrella here, when you talk about the zoo, the Kennedy Center, the museums, the Smithsonian, I think this is just out of the fascist playbook, right? The authoritarian playbook is to fascinate the fools and muzzle the intelligent folks, and the arts is an expression of dissidence. It's an expression of resistance. Oftentimes, music, art. Hank said, this is what Joe Strummer trained us for. This is punk rock time. That was Henry Rollins. And so going after the arts by way of, Kennedy Center, museums, Smithsonian Zoo, et cetera. And I know zoo is not really the arts, but it's kind of in the same um,
I mean,
bubble.
kids love the zoo. How, I mean, really?
You don't
I,
want them to learn about conservation of animals and endangered species, though, Jill, because that would go against our, attempts to buy giant chunks of Yellowstone and drill for oil.
yeah.
It was all in a Saved by the Bell episode. But
I never thought I'd be defending zoos because one of my first political actions as a young person was to oppose zoos on the grounds that we were paying more to feed Sinbad the gorilla at Lincoln Park Zoo in Chicago than a family of 4 on welfare got. And I thought it was a bad allocation of resources to feed. I mean, I have different feelings now, but I'm just saying it was my first political involvement was let's get rid of the zoos and feed people on welfare. But anyway, now I'm defending the zoos, and I think they have a good purpose. I'm a big animal rights person and love to go to places where I can see animals in the wild, which is where I do believe they should be. But if it helps us to protect them in the wild for young children to see them, they have a purpose. And if it can help with reversing extinction as it has been, then I think zoos should take care of the animals and leave them in as much freedom as they possibly can.
yeah,
Um,
San
but the
Diego Zoo helped save the California condor after, oddly enough, Johnny Cash ignited a fire and destroyed their entire habitat and killed off most of them. If you take
Johnny
the San Diego,
Cash, wait, how could that be? Johnny Cash did that?
accidentally,
Seriously?
accidentally
Oh my
started a fire,
gosh.
ruined
Johnny
their house.
Cash, Johnny
Mhm.
Cash came to the Watergate trial because one of the 3 trial lawyers was me, Richard Benvenista, and Jim Neal. Jim Neal was Johnny Cash's lawyer. And so Johnny Cash came to the trial. I got to meet him and his wife. So there you are. So I'm sure it was accidental. He was a lovely man. He would never have tried to hurt an animal. I can't believe it. But
No,
okay,
yeah, it was totally an accident, and he helped
totally
fund
believe
the
you.
project through the San Diego Zoo to save the. Yeah, it's a little bit of a zoo tour lore here in San Diego, world famous San Diego Zoo.
Really, really, wow. And the San Diego Zoo is one of the good zoos where they do really um, leave the animals. There's a place in Illinois called Prairie. Oh gosh, I'm gonna have to think of the name of it in the middle of the state that has created almost unobstructed areas for animals that were native to Illinois when Illinois became a state. And that includes large cats. Um, I guess bobtails, I think is what they are. Um, and but they're put in a place where they can't jump on you
Right.
because of how it's fenced, even though the fencing is
It's a
inobtrusive.
massive habitat. Yeah,
Yeah,
we have the safari park out here, which is
yeah.
kind of like that as well.
It's called Prairie Wildlife Park, and it's quite an amazing place. Wonderful to visit and to see animals almost in the wild, and some animals that are being preserved that wouldn't otherwise still be in Illinois. It's fantastic. So I'm very excited to be talking to you. And is there any words of wisdom you'd like to leave our audience with?
Oh gosh, please stay positive and take breaks when you need to. It's like a choir, right? A choir can hold a note for an hour because if you need a break to breathe, someone else is still singing. Um, and that's kind of what we're fighting for. And if it feels like, some days like, oh, we're never even going to have any elections again. We just had one last week with Pennsylvania State House. A Democrat flipped a Republican plus 15 seat. We had one in Iowa in January where we flipped a plus 21 red district for the state legislature. We have elections today in Florida 1 and Florida 6 and Wisconsin. We are having elections. We're winning elections. Fingers crossed on Wisconsin.
Yeah,
And we
that's
just
today, everybody. So if you haven't voted,
did
and we managed to get this episode up today, April 1st, then it won't be too late. If it doesn't come out till tomorrow, well, then hopefully you voted, and hopefully we're celebrating Susan Crawford being the Supreme Court justice, because it will affect gerrymandering. It could affect abortion rights. It will affect abortion rights, no doubt.
yeah,
So it's an
take the wins,
important,
Microdose hope is,
yes.
I think, how Brene Brown put it.
And pre-order Joyce Vance's upcoming book, which will be a series of things that you can do. And that's what we want to know. The other thing is pay attention to the facts. Make sure your sources are reliable. That's why we have this show, is to talk facts. And I appreciate Alison Gill for joining me today in this discussion. And I'll look forward to seeing you again next week. We have Elie Mystal talking about his new book.
Elie Mystal is fantastic. I hope everybody picks up his book, enjoys his book. And Jill, thank you for having me. You
Right.
have always been an
So,
inspiration to me, so I appreciate you.
so give me advice on what's the timing of a comedian? I mean, you did stand-up comedy. How can I get better at this?
Practice. Just you just have to keep talking and keep doing it, and you get the idea of the timing. The best advice I can give you is always punch up, never punch down.
Okay, what does that mean?
Go after the authoritarians, the people in leadership. Don't punch down at the less fortunate. Always punch up.
Yes. Oh, well,
Uh,
of course. Yes, but
yeah,
that's in my heart.
yeah.
That is in my DNA. I would
Mhm.
always, as I said, I thought people on welfare deserved a better shot at things. So that's who I am, and will always be. So thank you.